Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our masterclass with Priyamvada Das. We begin February learning with inclusion, and it's an absolute pleasure to have Priyamvada here with us, and equally a pleasure to introduce her to our audience today. Priyamvada holds a master's degree in mathematics from St. Stephen's College and a certificate in science in early childhood development from Red River College in Canada. She's an exponent of TOK and mathematics HL and SL for the IBDP. Along with TOK and assessments, Priyamvada is an examiner and a moderator for mathematics higher level explorations and paper 2. She's been working as a workshop leader for IB APAC region since 2016 and has done over 20 workshops on mathematics approaches to teaching and learning and culture of thinking and assessments. Additionally, she leads the Early Childhood Development and Disabilities team at Umeed Child Development Center. This makes us a perfect person to talk about inclusion in the classroom. Premvada's accolades doesn't end here. Just to give a brief about how her journey began, she began from the Sri Ram School in Delhi. From there, she went on to teach at the Aga Khan Education Service from 2008 to 2012 as a head of academic transition. Here, she had the opportunity to work with the state and the national curriculum and also involve in the professional development of the staff and a lot of community development projects. She has been working with the Bombay International School since 2012 and has held several leadership positions from being the middle years coordinator, curriculum continuum coordinator, and a learning coach and head of inclusion. What makes Priyamvada is that even after many years of being in this profession, her love for this profession has only increased and she feels she grows with every experience. Despite being a student of mathematics, she enjoys reading on science and philosophy. Her current inspiration is a quote by Einstein: I am enough of an artist to draw free upon my imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. Wonderful. Priyamvada, I think on this note, we would be really happy to hear from you about what is it that you're going to bring to this masterclass. Eagerly waiting to hear from you, and over to you.
Thank you, Anuradha. Anuradha missed saying that she was my diploma coordinator when I was in Bombay International School. So my association with her is beyond just being a part of ABEA. And we have a very close relationship. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's, I think, set benchmarks. This is a topic which has been very close to me. It's a topic that I haven't been qualified for, but it's a topic that I have learned because I needed it as a parent and later as a teacher at BIS, where I looked after the inclusion space. So today what we're going to do is essentially try and unravel inclusion and see how in the current situation, it links so beautifully with the method that's being talked most about, which is the blended learning method. So I'm just going to share my screen and in a minute we can start. We have about 60 minutes to this, and you will agree with me, this is not something that can be crunched within 60 minutes. So I may fast track a few things, but I definitely want to leave about 5 to 10 or maybe even 10, 15 minutes towards the end for questions. At any point, if you feel that it's just getting too much and I'm talking too much, please do put your questions on chat or stop me. Lata is here to help me field questions and she'll let me know as we go along. So as the novel coronavirus escalated into a global pandemic, school districts all over the world made the difficult decision to shut their doors, forcing an abrupt and nearly universal shift to distance learning that proved disruptive for teachers, students, and parents alike. What at first seemed like maybe a temporary situation soon gave way to the new normal. As students, even graduating seniors and my son included, who were forced to finish school year remotely. For teachers, the shift to online education has meant rethinking lesson plans to fit a very different format. Communities are now making preliminary plans to reopen schools. It's currently looking like many students may be staggered, may have staggered in-school schedules to reduce class sizes and cafeteria overcrowding. That means distance learning will remain a key part of education in the foreseeable future. But at least now, educators, whether they liked it or not, had intense crash course in what works and what does not. All of us are eagerly awaiting the chance to reconnect with friends, teachers, co-workers, and teammates. In fact, this collective experience may instill in us a newfound appreciation for those field trips, for classrooms, for friendships, and even the workplace. With the outset of the pandemic, the world got thrown into teaching virtually, and even with this abating, we see a new paradigm in education, one that will naturally move towards a blended model. To put in Lewis Carroll's words in his book, Alice in Wonderland, I can't go back to yesterday. I was a very different person then. Blended learning is a perfect solution to marry the best of the two worlds of a brick and mortar school with that of a model where a student learns partially online or at least asynchronously. But he or she moves along an individualized learning pathway. So a blended learning or hybrid learning, as we call it today, has gained immense popularity. And what is even more significant, that in its vision of moving along a personalized pathway, it lends itself to integrating diverse learners and bringing them into the classroom. So this becomes inclusion in the classroom rather than opting for the usual segregation models of pulling out students or giving them one-on-one interactions. It does promise to support the more vulnerable and at-risk students who struggle with behavior problems, learning disabilities, low self-esteem, and a myriad of other challenges. So just to have that context, let's move on to what we plan to do today in our session. So these are some of the questions that I put for myself when I planned the presentation, and I'm sure you will have others, and I'm hoping that you will bring them along towards the end of the presentation. So some of the things that we are looking at is, can diversity and inclusion be supported in a blended learning environment? Are we prepared to take control of education through the use of technology tools? Can we adopt or woefully sink further and further behind because the instructional pedagogy is just not right? Many educators are asking themselves these questions as they reflect about the cultural shift that is occurring in today's classrooms. So the eventful day when Bombay International School shut its doors and went into the pandemic mode was March 14th. And all of us just were trying to stay afloat. We were suddenly getting used to Zoom. We were trying to figure out how to keep students engaged. For those of us who were teaching board years, we were wondering how are we going to do justice to assessments? And that just took a lot of time. But somewhere in June, we sat and said, we haven't really found out what students are actually feeling. And what about those students who benefited through one-on-one interactions? Those who came to the Student Resource Center, we call the Learning Center at BIS SRC. What are they doing? And so we decided in June to run a survey. And we were expecting to hear some really depressing stories. But what stood out was, it was a very mixed reflection. So there were many students who were happy because there was reduced social pressure. They felt there was a lot of support that they were getting from home. They felt that, things were more planned and organized because everything was being put on a common portal. We use either ManageBack, Toddle, Google Classroom, and they did feel it was better for them. It also allowed many students to adapt learning. If they were not able to do something in class, asynchronous classes where it was sending materials for them to access, videos, and they did feel that that was supporting them as well. And finally, we know that our students learn best through technology. They are all digital natives. They do things with technology that you and I cannot do. So they felt that there was a greater motivation for them in learning when tech tools were involved. However, there is always a flip side to everything. And the flip side was that there were issues of attention. Those students who have attention issues or learning barriers found that the attention and screen fatigue did get to them. The increased asynchronous work was not always something students were able to manage. If they did not have good executive functioning or self-regulation skills, they found work was piling up and it was going to a situation where they were not able to cope at all. Also, asynchronous work requires some level of upskilling before you start expecting students to take ownership of learning, and that may have been missing in the initial parts of our going into a completely online format. And of course, they missed social interactions. They wanted to come to school. They wanted to play sports. They wanted to meet friends. And that was something which was not happening. So why are we bringing this into this whole gamut of inclusion? So let us first understand inclusion, how inclusion has also evolved as a concept and as an understanding. So this diagram actually very beautifully depicts what inclusion actually means. So if you look at the last picture here, this is where inclusion is, where everybody belongs in one system. Whereas if you look at the first three figures, the first one is an exclusion, where you find students are directly or indirectly prevented or denied access to education in any form. So certain students are not admitted into a mainstream school because of certain challenges or barriers they may have. The segregation model occurs when the education of students with disabilities is provided in a separate environment, designed or used to respond to particular or various impairments in isolation from students without disabilities. So you have the neurotypical learners and the children who have learning challenges are kept separate, and their interventions and curriculum, everything is absolutely, it's completely non-intersecting. Integration was where I think we are still, and we want to move towards inclusion, is when you bring these learners into the classroom. However, what may not have changed, and this is food for thought, is that we expect these children to be a part of the mainstream curriculum so long as they are able to cope, so long as they're able to still satisfy the metrics. The curriculum hasn't changed. Whereas inclusion says that it is a systematic reform embodying changes and modifications in the content, teaching methods, approaches, structures, and strategies in education to overcome barriers with a vision serving to provide all students of the relevant age range with an equitable and participatory learning experience and environment that best corresponds to their requirement and preferences. So you're making students who we think are not neurotypical with those who are neurotypical. We are getting them all together, and we are saying that teaching should happen alongside, and the onus of actually including them comes to us in terms of modification of curriculum, content, and everything else to support children rather than the other way around. So why inclusion? I mean, there are these two beautiful quotes up here. And I think this is something which will resonate with you. If you already don't feel or understand what inclusion is, it will definitely resonate with you that every student can learn. And I'm sure you all are educators, and you have realized that, you know, students require different support structures, and they can learn, but they may not learn in the same day or in the same way. So basically their path or their pace may be different. But however, a student can learn. And when everyone is included, then everybody wins. This is a quote by Jesse Jackson. So let's just try and understand a little bit more about that. So inclusive education means that students with or without disabilities learn alongside one another in the same classroom setting with lessons that are accessible for all. So in some cases, inclusive education involves a co-taught classroom where a special educator and a teacher works alongside, which is a great thing. But in many cases that we may not be as privileged to have this as such. So you may have a special educator visiting the class at different points of and collaborating with the mainstream teacher to ensure that there is access to all children. But why is inclusion so important? I know we have said that it is that every student can learn and everybody wins, because there are certain fundamental principles of inclusion. And the first principle is that diversity in the classroom enriches and strengthens education. So when you have diversity in the classroom, oftentimes people think that we are doing service only to the children who have challenges, because we are supporting them, and it may actually impact or reduce outcomes for others. But that's not the case. The first reason why I would say diversity benefits all is it builds empathy. It raises expectations for all students, including those who have challenges, because reducing expectations is not the right thing, because these children have the potential to reach a certain level. It's just that it takes them longer, or they require different interventions to reach that. Also, when you have diversity in the classroom, you do use pedagogical methods, and we are going to talk about some of those principles of the pedagogical underpinnings, which enhances outcomes for all. We may have a small group discussion, which is not only good for students who are who are coping with challenges. It's also good for the others who are peer mentoring their friends, and in the process of peer mentoring, they are learning as well. The second principle that inclusion works on, and which works with everybody, including us, is that it's based on strengths. So when we look at inclusion, oftentimes we say this child has these challenges, but the child has strengths as well. And so if we use strengths and create the personalized curriculum to leverage on these strengths and then build on their challenges, it not only increases self-esteem, it also makes the child motivated to learn, and supports the child in learning the way he or she prefers to learn. And I think this is really, really important, because I had heard it in a talk some time back when we had a doctor from TIFR come to our school and talk about how does emotional well-being actually support children. And she's been doing this study for a long period of time. And what was really, really important, and what she said at that time and has stayed with me, is that she said if the emotional filters or the mental well-being of a child is not looked at as a premise and as a fundamental need, nothing else that you do will matter. So till your emotional filters allow you to actually feel involved or participate in class, children actually very often do not learn. So you may want to spend as much time trying to support them, but that may not happen. So using the strength-based approach is the second principle. The third is having student engagement, agency, and voice. This is again a very important fundamental, because this allows children to voice their abilities, their challenges. It motivates children to work. It also makes them independent learners. They become self-advocates, and they are able to support themselves in their learning in the future as well. Principle 4 is engaging with all critical stakeholders. And here I feel, what happens in schools, and I have seen many schools where the SRC or the learning center works in isolation, and you have the academic staff which works in isolation. And I think that doesn't work. You need to get together, because the child is in the class, and for them the regular discipline teachers are the ones who they interact with, and that's where social interactions also happen. So collaborating between the SRC as well as the teachers is critical. But what also more critical is to have leadership in the same page, to have parents, and finally also get students to understand why this entire program that is being customized for them is so important. And finally, inclusive teachers need commitment, knowledge, and practical skills. And I think that's also really important, because I know, having been a teacher, it is very hard to actually integrate and differentiate classrooms to make sure that everybody is accommodated for. And I think that challenge exists because there is not enough skill building around that. And I think that is something which every school should invest. But more than workshops, I would recommend a mentoring or learning coach model where you have the SRC teachers or somebody who is good with doing this, become a coach with you and work with you to actually support this in your classroom. So blended learning. Now, I'm being blended. I'm actually going through each one of them. We've talked about inclusion. We know what inclusion is. It's about involving everybody. It has some really good fundamental principles which are absolutely critical to include every learner. But why blended learning? So if you look at this particular figure, you can see blended learning is just like we had said right in the beginning of the session. It is a combination of a brick and mortar classroom, and it also talks about offline or out of school kind of interactions. In the current context, because everything has been online, even there has been no brick and mortar, you could also think of them as synchronous classes versus asynchronous. Synchronous is when you have a real-time interaction with your teachers and you're engaging with them on a Zoom platform, if not in a brick and mortar classroom. And asynchronous is the time where students interact separate from the teacher, or the teacher is just a coach. So if you see this particular figure, it tells you that it could move from online learning to small group discussions or instruction. It could be collaborative between peers, and it could also be highly individual. Go through a combination of all of that. That is blended learning. And what the pandemic has made us realize is the power of technology. I know many of us have been using technology in our teaching and learning, but what has happened is during the pandemic, we had to take a one step forward and take further risks to really understand the power of technology. I know today I am using tools I would have never thought of using. That just shows that technology as a part of this blended learning format makes it even more powerful and makes it even more inclusive for learners who may want to vary their path or make their learning a little more adaptive. So let's just think about how we can change. So we had our regular classes, we were using tech tools to kind of support learning, but what is changing now? We are saying that obviously blended learning has these fundamental principles that it works on, where you can move from different formats, and there are different models, and read on that. I'm not going into too much detail about that. It also has approaches, moves from instructor-led to self-directed, and it has multiple modes. And when you bring all of it together, the kind of blended learning solutions that you have become even more powerful. So just a personal reflection. When I began to use blended learning, and this was a few years back, not recently, I always thought blended learning was much like the flipped learning model, where you actually give children pre-reading, you try and transfer the front-loading knowledge-based construction in class to making it more student-directed, and the teacher would then have class discussions to really delve deep into this material. But today, I think it is more than that. It's not just about giving students the opportunity to work with materials in different modes on their own. The critical point that we really need to look at is the aspect of personalized learning pathways. And I think that is what we need to focus on. And if we focus on that, the whole narrative of inclusion becomes even more alive. So if I want to look at various pedagogical methods that are used in blended learning format, we know that it increases student agency because students can decide the mode, and I'll give you a few examples as we go along. It incorporates flexible learning styles, and it also allows things to become interchangeable. It is not always necessary that you have to have all, if you decide to have a flipped model, it's not necessary that the pre-reading always happens offline and in the synchronous mode, you do discussion. It could be reverse also. You can decide how you want to modify, and the flexibility becomes great. But the focus points here we need to keep in mind is that it allows for difference in path, pace, place, choice, voice, and advocacy. Now, if I look at each one of them, so path is the method that you choose to learn. Place is where you want to learn. Do you want to learn on a Zoom classroom? Do you want to learn it through an online video? Would you want to read a textual material, or would you want to go and do an experiment? Would you have an experiential setup where you're learning from? So the place can also change. And the pace is very, very important. I don't know when this whole Khan Academy revolution started. I remember how many of my students actually used to go back, and I'm a math teacher for grade 11 and 12. I stood up, I actually sat up one day when I realized how many of my students were actually going back home and listening to videos again. And then I realized that it's okay, because the children need repetition. They need possibly, a different person explaining it to them. It's actually fine. And it allows children to pace and repeat. And that makes it very, very critical. It also allows you choice. It allows you, and the choice boards and other examples will come along here, but it allows you choice. There is greater flexibility. In a classroom, you're restricted by the resources and the space that you have. But when you look at it beyond your classroom, your ability to give choice is also higher. And automatically, this gives place for student agency, voice, and advocacy. So doesn't it already sound very inclusive? So before we actually talk about the examples, I wanted to allude to the universal design for learning, because this is the most accepted method for inclusive education. It is the most research-based and evidence. So it is an evidence-based educational practice. It is, in a nutshell, a framework which allows you to promote differentiated teaching and learning, or accessible teaching and learning in all contexts. And it's a fairly simple framework, and that's what makes it sustainable as well. It believes that all students are expert learners, so it is strength-based. Believes in making the shift from individual deficit to curricular inefficiency. So it again talks about what we said in inclusion, that it is not about the student not being able to do something. What is it that we can do in our curriculum so that can support the child to learn in the way he or she can? And the universal design for learning is an approach to teaching aimed at meeting the needs of every student in a classroom. It can be helpful for all students, including kids with learning and attention issues. So just to kind of put the framework in front of you, we have the universal design of learning. It has 3 pillars. I like to call it the 3 pillars. The first green one, and it shows that different parts of the brain is getting lit up, because that's the science behind it. So the first one is the effective one, which allows for engagement, motivation, feeling good about being in class. It's a hook. So that's the effective part. The second one is about the what of learning. So how can we present our learning to students? What are the different ways so that the child is able to receive information in the way he or she likes to receive it? And the last one is the strategic one, which is the how, which talks about how can students then decide on how they would want to express themselves or present their learning. So the first one stimulates interest and motivation. And I think we said that should be right at the beginning, because you need your emotional filters open. So the first part of the universal design for learning does stimulate interest. It allows children to feel a part of the classroom. They feel that they can engage themselves. And so it's first pillar. And after that, we get into actually presenting information. This is something that the teacher can plan, but it doesn't have to be teacher directed. But this is what you would like to say, the learning outcomes that you've decided for your class. How would you present all of them to your class? What are the different ways that you would want to do it? And the last one is, how can students express themselves? And these are just a few examples here. So in engagement, you can let students make choices about the kind of tasks that are relevant. So make a problem more authentic to their lives. So you may want to teach them surface area, but maybe they could think about the surface area of their of the floor of their room and decide how they want to design it. I mean, how do they want to put things so that they have everything in the room? So make it a little more authentic for them. It also makes it contextual and allows some students to see math in a real life context. Create opportunities for students to get up and move around. So this is something which many students who have attention issues, oftentimes we say, oh, don't rock your chair, come on, don't move, sit down, look here, and not allowing them that ability to move around or have a, I wouldn't promote fidget in BIS. We had to take it away because it was quite distracting, but having something which they can play with or move around or do something kinesthetic is also something which can allow them to feel engaged and motivated in a class. The second one, where we do representation, we oftentimes use textbooks, but textbooks, even beautiful textbooks that have come up into the market now. I know the textbooks that I read when I was young, like so boring, and they were just black and white print, hardly any drawings. Now we have some really nice books, but they are primarily visual. So if you can give textbooks as an audible book, or something as a video, or something that they can do as a hands-on activity, all this will also change the way you're presenting information, and it will allow for different kinds of learners to engage and learn. And finally, how can they express themselves? And this gets linked to assessment. As a teacher, I know I've heard this, and I possibly may have been party to saying it as well, that but finally they have to do one kind of an exam. So why are we allowing them different ways of doing assessments and tasks? But having said that, I think a lot of boards are recognizing that there are students who learn and present information differently, and there are accommodations that are offered. So within that gamut of offering, I think we should promote different ways in which children can express their learning, and also to know that at the initial stages of concept building, I think rather than getting stuck on the fact that it's going to be a paper pen test, allowing them to show their learning, getting the concept, and then maybe working with them and training them in an area that they may otherwise find tough to express themselves in. So this is just in a nutshell. This is the universal design for learning. Now, why, when we hear UDL and when we see blended learning format, there is a lot of similarity, right? And I wanted to bring that to the forefront. So if you see in the left, in the first visual, you have a universal design for learning, and you have blended learning, and they're shown as two separates. And I think the first thing we need to see is that let's not think of it as separate. People who have been doing UDL for a very long period of time have realized that what they do can easily be promoted through a blended format, where you are changing things, making them flexible, which is what is supported in UDL. So if you look at UDL and blend it together, it gives you a perfect solution. So just let's look at this figure, and this is in a book by Caitlin Tucker, and I'll just give you the name of a book. It's called Balance with Blended Learning. She talks about how we can make small adjustments to make our learning blended as well as fitting the UDL. So if you look at this figure, you have a bunch of students who possibly have been given a collaborative offline challenge. So the teacher has just given them a challenge. She is not available really to teach the content for it. There is a challenge which motivates the child to start working on it, and they work collaboratively with peers. And one of the things that also, research has shown that when you look at, high learning outcomes, the one thing where learning outcomes stand out as the highest is when people learn through their peers. And I just want you to take a moment and think about a time when you went for a workshop, not for this one. This is a master class. I'm sorry, I'm doing a one way kind of a dissemination. But when we went for a workshop, which was interactive, think about when did you learn most? Did you really learn from the workshop leader, or was it with your peers. And I think mostly I have come back, and I've heard many people come back to me and saying that, when I talked to a few other people who were in the same context as me and we discussed with each other, I had my aha moment. And I think that's also very critical where children are concerned. So you give them a challenge, you put them collaboratively, you give them a personalized, practical, a practice online or video lesson. And we are saying personalized because you can do it through an interactive Pear Deck or a Nearpod. You can give them a video which is broken down through Edpuzzle, or it could be something where a child who is more visual gets certain, reading material. So you personalize the reading material or the content, where the child actually interacts with the content. You personalize that and offer it to them, and lead them to have small group offline discussions. So you have a challenge, you've given them the material, and you've given them some time to do small group discussions. You as a teacher are just a coach or an observer. You can go even in a Zoom class, you can put them into breakout rooms and you can visit breakout rooms. Here are some of the discussions. Let them ask you questions and pull that real-time feedback and provide some of that feedback back to them so that they can loop it back in and complete the task. Now, this is something where the teacher is just a coach, and the most of the class is done by students. However, you can see here, this is very blended. It also uses technology if required. It also allows children to work in small group discussions, and there is a constant change of situations that are happening. You can also end off this with a gallery presentation or a whole class discussion to make sure that everybody has, knows what they have presented and whether those presentations are well justified by them, or if there are any areas that you would want misconceptions to be cleared. My favorite is always giving a project choice board. And I think this works miraculously when children have finished their challenge. You can tell them, come on, you can do a TED talk, you can make a movie, you can write a children's book, you do a slideshow, you can do whatever you feel like. You can make a model. And I think the moment you give them a project choice board, their ability to exercise their choice on the basis of their strengths happens automatically. Sometimes, not very often. You can also allow the what, how, and why of your curriculum, where you can tell them to select the subject or topic, decide the process or tools, and also define the purpose and create the product. And this is a little bit more open-ended, and you find that as you start getting students to exercise their agency and voice, this gets better as we go along. I'm just keeping an eye on this thing. So just a few more minutes and then I can maybe open up for discussion. But one thing that I needed to bring here is that we did speak about inclusion, we said blended learning, we said UDL, and we said, oh, all this is great and this will bring inclusion into the classroom. But one thing we must keep in mind that marriages are made in heaven, so it's said. But we really need to work on it, right? So there are always compromises and there is some hard work. And there will always be pros and cons. So if you look at, even in the current context, you have synchronous and asynchronous classes. Maybe in the future, your synchronous classes could be on a Zoom or in a classroom, and your asynchronous classes could be the one where children do things offline without you really being available to them in real time. You could be available to them through email or any other format that you choose. All of these come with certain pros and cons. I mean, synchronous classes are great for social interactions, but it may not allow the kind of pace that you want students to have choice over. So maybe an asynchronous class is better. Synchronous classes and Zoom classes, even if you increase them, they can lead to fatigue, cognitive fatigue, screen fatigue. And there are a multitude of issues there as well. For asynchronous classes, unless your child has support for self-regulation, that could go haywire as well. So having looked at all of this and also knowing that technology comes with huge power and huge opportunities, it has its own pitfalls. you may find that it is not all students may have an equitable access to technology. And possibly many of us may be teaching in more privileged communities, but if you move to communities which are not as maybe you are in the margins, they may not have the kind of access or support at home that other children have. So it makes it a little inequitable. You can have internet issues. I know students use all this to their advantage when they keep dropping off at the right time. There is also possible that, with students interacting with technology more, there is the whole cyber safety issue. So all these need to be looked after. And so when I talk about this perfect marriage of bringing in UDL and blended learning into the classroom, we need to look at these aspects as well. So how do we find the right balance? And I think I'm going to stop here for a minute, and I'm going to take questions and any comments or thoughts that you have.
So we do have one question that's coming from Rohini. She asked how to standardize and moderate assessments which allow inclusive choices for students to project their understanding.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We live in a world of standardization because we have, board exams, we have standardized assessments. And I think somehow these standardized assessments go against the very grain of the fact that students may not be equally competent in a standardized assessment, but may actually have the potential and ability which may not show up in these standardized assessments. So I don't have a perfect answer if a child goes for a SAT exam, other than giving them the accommodations that are given through their, reports. There is nothing else, right? But as teachers in the teaching learning process, I know many of my students may not do well in exams, but they may have a brilliant mind to make a wonderful project and demonstrate their learning. And what I have seen as experience, and I've read a few papers where research has shown that when children are able to demonstrate and find achievement in a format that is accessible to them, their ability and resilience to also work with formats which are not so unfamiliar to them becomes a little easier. They work harder towards it. Otherwise, look at that one child who is, if his only metrics is, pen test, he's doing miserably, no achievement, and like the saying goes, nothing succeeds like success. He sees no success. If he sees no success, either you get frustrated, you start having false bravado, you say, oh, I don't care. And that's what happens with students, right? So I think we really need to keep those assessments, standardized assessments there as our future goal, and make sure your immediate and intermediate goals actually allow children to have an access to a multitude of ways of expressing their learning so that their confidence is built. And that's some children may not at the end do very well in an exam, but their confidence is intact. I think that's really important. Yeah.
All right, Rohini, I hope that answers your question. We have another question from Masira. If you give students project work in groups, how do you evaluate them individually?
So when I give project work to students or group work, the rubric has to, so we didn't go into too many of the technical details, obviously with the paucity of time that we have. So when you're doing a project work, you need to do meaningful project work, which requires you to then have a very clearly defined rubric, also have clearly defined roles. I think what works in favor for inclusion also is that if you have a group of students, you can give each student, based on their strengths, a particular role to work towards that project. So somebody could be very good at researching material and getting it. Somebody may be very creative in putting it in a certain format. Somebody else may articulate it beautifully. So I think everybody can get a particular role. And finally, the team gets a grade. But individual, because you're given individual roles, you will be able to still gauge what is the level of engagement or what was the benchmark that was achieved against each student. I think it is not a perfect answer, because I do know students come back and say, this particular student didn't do anything. And then that you really can't give them, you don't have enough evidence. So even being, going these station rotation models that blended learning talks about, it talks about the teacher being an observer. So you don't have to be away, you can observe. So it gives you that ability, but also to give them very clearly defined roles, which is strength-based. That will also, and maybe model that in a class first with students. Maybe you can take a role and give students a role. And once they know how that functions, they get better at it.
So there is a leading question to project work itself. What do you do with children who are not ready to submit projects?
So I'll tell you, one of the things, and this may be a part of the culture that we have in the Indian context, where project work was in the past almost non-academic. I mean, you do project, 20 marks, you know how beautiful you make it, and it doesn't really fit for purpose. And if this project don't have, say, a certain a kind of a weightage in your overall grade, then it doesn't become it almost becomes purposeless for the child. So I think project work first should be meaningfully created. It should have very clear learning outcomes. You should know what is it that you want. Students should know what they want. Students should know the purpose. Well, how is this going to help them really to understand something that they're doing? And finally, do give it weightage in your regular assessments. I think that's when students are ready to participate in projects. Educate parents. A lot of times, I know there was a time, so I'm a very unconventional math teacher, and if anybody has worked with me, they'll know that. And there was a time when I overheard one of my colleagues say that, oh, she does time pass. Okay, so I mean, because regularly what happens in a math class, you have those 10 terms, you have a formula, you do ragara, you do 100 questions more. And here I'm jumping around, creating origami and doing all the other stuff. So it seems like time pass. So you have to educate teachers, you have to educate parents to know that if you want a good 10th grade or a 12th grade, and especially in international and changing boards. Now, even our national boards are talking about, changing assessments. I think it's far more important to engage in projects, the thinking process, rather than just doing what I call donkey work, which is replicating. And AI coming, all these jobs are going to disappear. So it doesn't matter if a child is able to, do the toughest factorization in math. He won't be expected to do it. He will be expected to see how that really helps in some authentic real life problem. And projects lend itself to that. So to just put it in a nutshell, build purpose first, and then start educating people, give it due weight. And I think there is a lot that needs discussion here. Your leadership should be in the same page, and everybody should be in the same page before it really takes. So it's not about the student, it's the system. I'm very pro students here. Even in inclusion, they say that let's not look at student deficits. There is something in the culture or the system which is not allowing for students to really engage or participate in these. Yeah.
So we have a question on Facebook that says, do you recommend any skills framework instead of standard assessment? And if yes, can you just give an example?
So there are multiple skills frameworks. So I know the Bloom's taxonomy is an old one, but you have Krathwohl, which is something which really applies well for different kinds of skill acquisition. You also have the Higgs. It's called Biggs. Higgs is Higgs boson. Biggs taxonomy, which looks at how do we actually interact with information? Is it very unirelational, or is it in connection with things? Is it complex? So there are multiple such taxonomies that exist. And if you look at assessments which are given by A levels and IB, they follow these taxonomies. So when you see a simple question, you will see a question which is rooted in the knowledge. Then you move towards one which is a simple, familiar context. Then you move to something which is unfamiliar. And finally, you come to a context where one concept doesn't answer. You need multiple concepts to come in to really critically evaluate and be able to answer. So this is more skill-based, yeah.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Hiram. We have a question from Rachna. How helpful is asynchronous work for children with special needs in the primary? What is the ideal asynchronous work that we can give them?
So primary school, the way we looked at asynchronous and synchronous, and I'm assuming you're talking about the current context where we are completely online. I think it was a very difficult decision because younger children require more support in terms of, because they may not have skills of self-regulation, but at the same time they are the ones who get most screen fatigued. So you have to give them the asynchronous classes. I found using formats such, giving them a Nearpod class, which has a video, some questions, some fun activities, completely directed asynchronous class where they log on and they know 30 minutes they spend on that. They answer as they go along, and you get this information which gives you real-time feedback as to what the child is thinking, so that in the next discussion, you focus on that rather than something which is, general and which children may know. And you'll be surprised that my daughter's in grade 3. She's in primary school. Initially we had a lot of apprehension, but we find that they do take to asynchronous work, which is planned well and which is very clear in instructions. So make sure that your instructions are visually provided. There is also a verbal, maybe have a voice note. Don't give them, wordy, long kind of instructions, or give instructions in a class, and make sure that it also is supplemented with something that goes back home, and keep it as interactive and short as possible. The shorter you keep it, the more successful you get. That, yeah.
Okay, I think that is key, that it needs to be short and interactive. Okay.
Yeah.
Haya says that I've seen special children in the classroom become special for students as well as for their teachers. When we talk inclusive, how can these children feel inclusive? And there is another question related to that by Pallavi, that what is the ideal student to special educator ratio in an inclusive school?
Okay, so the first question, Lata, you'll have to repeat to me. You said a special needs student in a classroom
becomes special for the students as well as the teachers. So how do you promote inclusivity in such a classroom? How do you make that child feel, at par with the others?
So I think that's where the whole crux of differentiation comes in. You differentiate your classes that the child is still able to participate. I'll give you a very simple example. I teach math and I have math phobic students, right? Students who will always feel somebody else knows the formula, somebody else will do it, or I'll do something wrong. But what you do, you create a conversation outside math where they're still able to kind of predict or participate. So I'll give an example. I may have a glass tumbler, and I want to find out the rate at which I'm able to fill the glass bottle using some mensuration or whatever else. But I can always say that, can you estimate, can you guess, what do you think when you're filling it from a tumbler, how much time does it take? And you can get everybody to kind of talk about it. And do you think, why do you think it happens? Do you think it's the speed of this? Do you think it's the length of this? And people will answer. And I think that itself makes a child feel included. And they'll realize that, and actually this is more important, because in real life, nobody is going to give you a perfect shape or a perfect situation to have a real authentic problem solving. You need to kind of guess all of that. That does the color of the water matter, or does the height of the cylinder matter? Obviously, the height of the cylinder matters. So these kind of questions allow other children to be also included. Also allowing for, when there's a stigma, it becomes hard, because, a lot of times when children say, oh, don't give me different work because my friend will ask me something. So try and, in a smart way, where you say everybody's got something different, but that you have aligned it to what the child can do, differentiate it so that they're still participating. In their IEP, it is clearly identified. Maybe a grade 3 child is actually working at a grade 1 level, but the child doesn't know. The child is still working with that comprehension passage and seeing achievement. I think it has to be done subtly, and it comes experience. It's a journey. We were just talking about it. It comes. And I think somewhere we ourselves feel very nervous about doing it. I think we need to take that action and say, we're going to do it. We're going to do it meaningfully. We're going to have interactions, conversations, and do it. And it does work. It does work. What was the other one?
The other one was, what is the ideal student to special educator ratio in an inclusive school?
So we are a school of, not more than 40 students in a grade. So 2 divisions, so 20 each. So you can say we are about 500 students. And started off when I took over as head of inclusion with 2 special educators and 2 counselors. That is a ridiculous ratio. So I think what you also need to realize is you need to really be clear about what is the role of your special educator. A special educator is not about teaching all the children who have needs. They are the ones who are going to support children who cannot, even with UDL, be completely, they don't get all the interventions that they require in a class. They need additional support. So the SRC person will meet them after class, but they can also be part of the class, the other students. So now we have about 6 special educators across, and I think that's a fairly healthy ratio, out of which 4 are qualified and 2 are assistant. Because sometimes you just need people to support children with, self-regulation, getting the material organized. It's not so much about getting into the nitties of what a special educator does. So we have 6 and we have 3 counselors. So we are a team of 10 in 500 who work, and these teachers, some of them are part-time, and they have a load of 45% of one-to-one interactions, 40% in class, and the remaining is their release time. So they are actually quite ideally, maybe in an ideal world, it'll be more, but I think I've been told that we are very fortunate and most schools don't have it. So don't kill me if your leadership now says that, where did you hear these ridiculous numbers? But you do need those kind of support. Yeah.
So we have one more question from Saroj. How can leadership promote a positive approach to student deficits among the workforce?
So that's a good one. At least it's coming from leadership. I've always had the other way around, where leadership sometimes finds it hard to understand that inclusion is the way, and it's not about pulling out students and giving one-on-one interactions or telling them just, drop the subject, you're not for this and you're not for that, So if you're saying it's the other way around, I think the only way leadership can support, and when I was given that leadership role, I realized till you model it for teachers and till you support them. See, for teachers, it's hard because I'm also a teacher. It's easier said than done that, you do all these strategies and you manage, and the special educator is going to help you. You will find lots of times you are so frustrated because you're not able to reach out to every child, or you're not able to then meet the academic standards of completing syllabus or getting the kind of grades that maybe the school leadership sets expectations to. So I think the first thing is model and work as a leader. That helps. And secondly, support your teachers with a lot of professional development in terms of coaching. And you could be the coach if you've understood inclusion, or you at least believe in it. You could be the coach who actually supports these teachers when they are going through. So if you have 2 children in the spectrum in your class, already realize and empathize with them that these are the challenges that you will have. These are some of the things that you can do, and these are some of the things you may not be able to do. And it is perfectly fine to then outsource those. So I think having those conversations and modeling it and being inclusive yourself with your teachers, with the way you do things, changes the culture. And I think, but it's a lovely question. It's nice to see that the leadership is promoting inclusion. Yeah.
Anuradha ma'am, you're on mute.
Yes. Oof, and phew, I must say, I guess it's such a whole lot of work. Very, very important, as Priyamvada said, that it is important to walk the talk and model practices, because it is easier said than done in terms of inclusion, because we need to look at students' outcome, we need to look at their social emotional needs, we need to look at the overall output of the classroom in general, because I know the statement, what I'm very familiar with, where what Priyamvada talked about, that her classroom, they're just about doing something, and it's, I don't know whether she's teaching or not. Yes, I know this experience of Priyamvada's class. Yeah, and so it's just so important to set the teacher tone, the teacher language, the body language, the classroom culture. I think so many things that one needs to take in mind when one looks at inclusion. We really hope that we can, and in an online classroom, when we are looking at a session of 4 e-learning sessions where Priyamvada, we really are hoping that we can bring in all the nuances of inclusion right from primary, say, and into secondary, because Priyamvada teaches the higher secondary classes, and she's been doing work at Ummeed with the early childhood. So she kind of comes with the entire range, right from teaching the higher secondary to working with the early childhood. So I'm sure we'll have a gamut of strategies when she does the e-learning program, and we do hope to learn much more from her. Thank you for an extremely enriching session, and I could relate to quite a bit of it because these are conversations we've had. These are things that we've spoken about, and absolutely enriching. And thank you so much, Priyamvada, for this evening.
I just wanted to end with one thought because you brought in early, the early years. So, I use this metaphor, which I didn't hear at all. It was given to me by somebody. It's called the leaking tap metaphor. So if you have a leaking tap, you can mop the floor a million times, but you will always have to keep mopping. So even if we do special education and interventions and everything else, the floor is never going to be dry. So what you really need to do is you have to impact the tap. You have to fix it. And the tap is where the early learning years are. So if you can actually address your youngest and your early years with early identification and support, that's where the crux lies. And I think there, blended learning or not, it's just that you need to support it at the earliest, because we tend to say it's okay, and then suddenly we sit up when they come to middle school and they're not getting the. And I think it's really unfair, not only for the student, but also for the teachers at that stage to make that.
Absolutely great metaphor, Priyamvada. And I think that's where the interventions start with, and identification, intervention, and that's a whole lot of area that I think as teachers, not everyone is aware of. We are empathetic about it. We try to do things, but I think we need a lot more involvement and a lot more, modeling the practices that we are talking about in the classroom at the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was lovely. Thank you for taking the evening out and putting up with me. See you sometime soon. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening ahead. See you for our next masterclass next week. We'll be putting out the details very soon. And happy learning till then. Bye.